Hello everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar series. I'm Kim Bischoff, the Executive Director of the National Neurofibromatosis Network. These webinars have proven to be an excellent way for the NF Network to reach individuals across the country. This evening we're very fortunate to have with us Vanessa Merker, who is the Senior Clinical Research Coordinator at Massachusetts General Hospital. We will learn tonight about patient-centered outcomes, which is the idea that when you incorporate the patient's and the family member's preferences and the ideas into research, it leads to more important and more useful discoveries. In this webinar, we will hear what patient-centered research is and how it has grown over the last 5 years, how patient-centered research is developing in the NF community, and what we can do in the future. What ways you can get involved with research, not just as a subject in a study, but as a true patient partner, helping brainstorm research questions, improve study design, and sharing results. After the talk, we'll have some time for questions and answers. You can type your questions to be read out loud in the webinar control panel on your screen. To write a question to be read aloud, click on the question box located on the lower portion of the webinar panel. And now I would like to introduce you to Vanessa Merker. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a delight. I'm looking forward to your presentation. This is something I'm sure all of us are going to be learning more about.
Absolutely. I really believe that this is the future, not just for research in NF, but research in all diseases.
Right, and something that I hope we will be hearing about when we're going to the clinics.
Absolutely.
Well, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you everyone for joining me, and again to NF Network for inviting me to talk about this research. Before I start, I'll give you a little background about myself so you know how I came to this field and why I'm so invested in patient-centered research. So my name is Vanessa Merker, and I've spent the past 5.5 years working at the Mass General Hospital NF clinic with Dr. Scott Plotkin, and it was there that I really got my introduction to research and research methods, and really a love for studying neurofibromatosis and schwannomatosis. And it's where I first got to meet patients with NF and schwannomatosis and really get to hear some of their concerns and really appreciate their interest in research. And so simultaneously, I'm also going to school getting my PhD at Boston University at the School of Public Health. And that's where I was exposed a lot more to some of the concepts of patient-centered research and a framework that really formalizes what I think a lot of us already know, which is that patients have a lot to contribute to the research process. In the past, we may have been over-focused on what researchers and doctors think they know, and they do know a lot, but so do patients and the people who are really living day to day with the disease. So today I hope I can answer a few questions for you, at least briefly, which is, first of all, what do I mean when I say patient-centered research, and why is it important? And then I'll step back a little bit from some examples to say just how patient-centered research has really been growing and being funded at a very high national level, in the recognition that from even the highest levels that this is important and worth investing in. And then I'll focus in on how NF researchers are starting to do patient-centered research and some ideas on how we can do even more. So for patient-centered research movement really came out of the patient-centered care movement, which is something that's been happening more and more, moving from what can be called a paternalistic approach. Doctor knows best, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it, to a more inclusive, interactive, patient-centered approach that's really trying to train doctors and patients together to make decisions, because while doctors might know a lot about the pathophysiology of the disease and what treatments are and what the side effects are, only the patient really knows what side effects could I live with. You know, would I rather choose option A or B depending on what the risks and benefits are. And just to further sort of explain that dichotomy, one of the things that really distinguishes this physician-directed, the doctors knows best kind of treatment is that things were fairly standardized, and this was true with research as well. We focused a lot on what's best for the average person, what would be the best choice to treat the population. And with the patient-centered care movement, we're really trying to focus in on personalizing treatments, on saying, given what you value, what's important to you and what you personally need and can do and the support available to you, what's the best option we can pick? And this is something that gives a much more active and engaged role to patients. And really, it's the same thing in patient-centered research, which was a little bit slower to come to the forefront here in the U.S., but definitely has a lot of the same characteristics of patient-centered care in that it's involving patients a lot more directly in what research we do, how we do the research, and ultimately what we're finding out and how we can feed it back directly into the clinics where it's going to help people the most. So as a starting off point for what patient-centered research is, really it's something that is focused on helping people make real day-to-day decisions in the clinic and allows patients' voices to be heard in assessing these different options. So some of the questions you might ask about a particular treatment or disease are, given my personal characteristics and preferences, what should I expect will happen to me? That focused on, I don't care about what happens to the average person. Is there a way you can focus this information on what I need and what might happen so we can get a better sense of where things are going? It's about what are my options and what are the potential benefits and harms, because there's always pros and cons to a lot of treatments, and while sometimes it's very clear what a specific course of action might be for a particular problem or symptom, other times it's not so clear and there are trade-offs to both sides. And the same thing about how do I improve the outcomes that are most important to me? And this is a theme you'll hear me touch on a lot because really one of the biggest keys of patient-centered research is what outcomes matter to patients. There's always been a very big focus in many fields, especially involving tumors, that the only things that were important was how long you survive and how big is your tumor. Now obviously these things are very important as well, and I don't want to minimize them. But I want to point out that there are a lot of other things that can also be important that we need to pay attention to, like quality of life, like how you can function day to day. Can you go to school? Can you go to work? Are you enjoying your time with your family and friends? And how you can function. And patient-centered research is really trying to integrate those questions into the same kinds of questions we've already been asking. So just to dig a little bit deeper into what patient-centered research is, it's very much focused on comparing benefits and harms in a way that's specifically to inform decision-making. I think this is important because sometimes when you talk to people about research, they have the mental image of someone being in the lab by themselves, maybe working in a cell culture with pipettes and other lab tools, and it can be very far off from what's actually going to help the patient. And really these are foundational to the discoveries that we make. But by bringing patient-centered research and always keeping in the forefront of our mind, how are we going to inform decision-making? How are we going to help the specific doctor or nurse and patient in making a decision? It helps us ground our research questions to form them in a way that gives the most information that we can possibly get. The second part of patient-centered research is that it's inclusive of an individual's preferences and needs. Not everyone with NF is alike, which is an obvious statement, I think, to any of the patients and family members on this phone call. But there are people who need different things from their care and ways they want to interact with their physicians and their care team and what their goals are. So it's important to take that into consideration. And as I mentioned before, we're really trying to focus on outcomes that people notice. So function, symptoms, quality of life, which as you can see from this image really encompasses a lot of things. And there is a huge health component, but it also involves your family, what stress you're under, how your mental health is, your spirituality, and how all of these things are really integrated into one person. In fact, this focus on outcomes that people notice about is happening throughout the drug development process. The Food and Drug Administration, which is the U.S. governmental body that approves new treatments, has said that they want to know, how does your drug improve how a patient feels or functions? That it's less important what an MRI looks like than is the patient better in their day-to-day life. And the last part of patient-centered research, which is really important, and I think organizations like the NF Network and other patient advocacy organizations really help with, is that we have to incorporate the widest variety of patients in research to be able to tease out these individual differences and to be able to reach everyone in spreading the information that we find out. With a wide variety of settings, it means not just in the very specialized clinics that are at Mass General Hospital and other institutions, but what about what happens when you go see your primary care provider or specialist that might be more local to you, and how we can help with that whole system. So, given that I've talked about this big focus on the outcomes that matter to people, how are we trying to achieve that? And one way is called patient-reported outcomes. It's often abbreviated PRO or PROs. And what that means is sort of what it sounds. It's outcomes that actually come from you instead of a lab value from a blood draw or measuring your tumor on an MRI or having the doctor say, you look better or worse. This is actually when you ask the patient to fill out a survey or you interview them to see, how are you doing and in what ways is this treatment affecting you? And really, this is the key question when you're assessing any treatment, whether this is just a clinical treatment or a actual research trial in which we're trying new drugs out, is the tests can give you extra information about what's happening internally, how your organs are functioning, and exactly what numbers to put on their status, but does the treatment make a difference to you and how you can live? And that's a huge benefit to weigh when you're talking about treatments. We do have some patient-reported outcomes specifically developed for NF, and I'll tell you quickly about one. It's called the NIFTY QOL. QOL is for quality of life, and it was specifically developed for patients with NF2 by a group in England who does a lot of NF research. And they worked hard doing interviews and focus groups with patients about NF2 to figure out, if we were going to make a short and easy-to-use questionnaire, what are the most important areas we should ask about to track how people are doing? And I just put up the first few questions that are on this questionnaire, and you can see that they're considering what's not only symptoms like balance, hearing problems, facial weakness, but specifically how those symptoms affect how you can perform your usual activities like work, housework, playing sports, socializing, because this is really a key interaction between the symptoms of something and how it affects how you can function and the accommodations we can make from that. And something that I'm really excited about that is emerging is using mobile applications or apps on your phone to be able to use these patient-reported outcomes. So this is from screenshots from a specific mobile app that was developed for cancer patients. But you can just pull up on your phone this app, and where the symptom reporting is, you might say, I'm having a fever now, and you could get through questions in a real time, have your team track how you're doing. And what I even like better about apps is the possibility to add in extra features that I think can really benefit patients. You'll see on the right here that this is a list of a resource. It's an education library. So if you clicked on one of those topics, you can get a little video or information about how to deal with these symptoms and manage them. And these apps are getting much more advanced in setting appointment reminders or reminders to take your medicine, having places to take your notes. And I think this is one of the futures of patient-reported outcomes. And in fact, on your web, many of you might already be receiving surveys for your care team, from your care team, to help track how you're doing. I know that some electronic medical record systems have already integrated this feature, and I know that in the future, Mass General Hospital will as well. So now I'm going to go into what are called patient research partners, and this is really an expansion of what I've already been talking about. Patient-centered research is sort of the umbrella term for trying to do research that matters to patients, that answers their questions. And the idea of patient research partners sort of expands this to say, not only let's make the research question patient-centered, let's make the entire research process patient-centered by having patients not just be a subject, but actually be a part of the team, co-leading this research and contributing from the very first steps to the publishing and spreading the results. And this is something that has been demonstrated time and time again, that patients can really add a lot of value throughout this research process. I have a picture here of the research cycle, and it goes from everything from identifying the research area that you're going to study to designing the best way to get information, actually carrying it out, and then analyzing all of the results you get until you're able to both publish your research results and feed them back to the patients and doctors who need to know them. And I've listed here just, I've listed here just a few of the ways that patients have helped before in partnering in research studies. So one thing that is very widespread is you guys are the ones who help us identify what are the most important research questions. What don't we know the answer to that you really need, and helps us prioritize where to put our resources. And in some way, this happens a lot in something called focus groups, which if you'd participated in, you'll know are when we bring a collection of people together, usually with some common feature like having NF1 or being parents of children with NF, and have a discussion where everyone can bounce ideas off of each other and figure out what's most important. Also, patients can help plan the study by really helping us plan specific methods that will encourage people to participate and not make it really hard to do so. There can be some problems when scientists and other researchers get so excited about what they're doing and they want to know so much information that the study can end up having so many MRIs and surveys and lab tests that it does help science, but can be such a strain on the patients who are volunteering their time in the study. And so by having actual patients and people who have participated in research in the past and consult on this design, they can help you weigh what's the specific information we need the most and what maybe we don't need so that we can make it as easy as possible for people to participate. And this is something that's actually really key, because if it's not easy, you don't get enough people to be in studies, to get the answers, and you don't get that wide range of different kinds of people, which you need if you're going to be able to find information that's applicable to everyone. Another thing that patients can help with is giving their input on what outcome measures are meaningful. And when I say outcome measures, I mean the thing that we're going to judge the success or failure of a new treatment on. So are we going to use as the outcome measure of a specific study this certain survey as opposed to this other survey? Are we going to use the size of this tumor, or are we going to use how much the tumor hurts? And this goes back again to what I was saying about the outcomes that matter to people. And so it makes sense that if you want to know what outcomes are meaningful, ask the person who's actually experiencing it. And one of the last things I wanted to mention about planning studies is patients can really help us when they review the recruitment flyers or informed consent documents that we hand out when we do research. Because I'm sure if any of you have ever consented to be in a study, you'll know that sometimes it's incomprehensible. I'm a PhD student, and sometimes I can't even understand it. So we really need to do a better job about making things simple and clear so that everyone has the information they want to know. And then moving through the process a little more, we can see that patients can also help actually conduct the study. This is where patients are really partnering up with the research team to help carry out. One thing that's we've seen examples of in other disease areas is patients who actually help with recruiting and actually doing interviews or surveys out in the field, maybe in the clinic as well. It's definitely a way that patients can partner to be actually doing this. And I think patients are one of the best resources when subjects have questions. I mean, it's imperative that you have good doctors and researchers on call to answer questions about specific symptoms or other medical issues, but sometimes someone who's considering being in research needs to know what's it like. I'm not sure about participating in research. I don't know really what this is for. And it can be great to have a patient on the research team to help answer those questions. And recently I've even seen people who are on patients who are serving on study advisory committees, which is a group of people who are sort of like consultants. They're like the executive board of a company, and where they meet together to give advice to the researchers about the study and oversee some of the procedures. And I've also seen examples of patients being on safety boards, which is for trials that are trying out new treatments. There's a group of people who will review the data that's coming in to make sure that the treatment people are getting is safe and isn't going to hurt them. And last, at the end of the study, don't emphasize the importance of sharing study results enough. It is great to do research and to find questions, but if nobody knows what you did and what you found, it's almost like you didn't do it at all. And so throughout the health community, there's been a big push for what's called implementation and dissemination. Implementation is how do we actually implement the things that you found in your study into the real-world clinic. And dissemination is how do we spread that information as far as we can so everyone is aware of the benefits. And this is where patient research partners can be really helpful. They help us identify the best ways that we can inform patients and family members through websites, through social media, through newsletters at advocacy organizations like the NF Network. And in fact, patients are even beginning to be invited to speak at scientific conferences and to help co-author the scientific manuscripts that we publish to add their voice. And it's something that I think is really exciting and is coming in a lot of groups that we've seen in other disease areas, and is hopefully something we're going to be able to integrate into NF very shortly. So now that we've really covered sort of what patient-centered research is and how it's done, I wanted to step back for a moment to look at this national landscape of patient-centered research, because you might be wondering how committed are researchers and the research community to actually implementing all of these ideals? And I'm going to say a lot, because back in 2010, the government actually authorized the creation of PCORI, which is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. This is a special institute, kind of like the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, if you've heard of that, which is dedicated to funding and promoting patient-centered research. It was created by the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, and the first project started in 2012. And one of the things I wanted to highlight was in November of 2013, they created a special advisory panel for rare diseases like NF. And I think this is a great example of how there is a commitment to not just funding common diseases like diabetes or heart disease, but also giving resources into important areas like NF. One of the things that is sort of the founding principle of PCORI, this Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, is engaging stakeholders. And if you hear this term, I don't want you to be confused. A stakeholder just means everyone that could possibly have an interest in the research outcomes. And this means patients, their family members and caregivers, and the patient advocacy organizations that represent them. It means from the medical field, clinicians, so doctors and nurses, the hospitals and physician organizations that they work for. It means the researchers and the medical schools and schools of public health that they're affiliated with, as well as insurance plans and different companies that make drugs and other treatments. And finally, policymakers, the people who are making the laws that, for instance, make access to drugs easier or cheaper, and bringing them all to the table as early as possible, recognizing that when we get input from all of these areas right at the beginning, we can do research that is really going to be more meaningful, more effective, and lead to outcomes that we can actually act on. And just to give you a scope of how big PCORI is, this institute, since its creation in 2012 up until a few months ago, so over 3.5 years, they've already funded 399 projects for a total of $854 million. The picture I have up here is their announcement just from the spring of 2015, these few months, how they approved 34 new research projects for $120 million, including, importantly, rare diseases. And I think this fits in a lot to what we were talking about in terms of how patients can influence the research process. And PCORI has implemented this wonderfully throughout their entire system, where at the beginning of this pyramid you can see PCORI and all of these stakeholders, including patients, are generating the questions and trying to prioritize them so they know where to put the money to make the most impact. PCORI will then issue announcements to try and get as many people as possible to think about these topics. And researchers and stakeholders together develop proposals. And this is something that I think really you hadn't seen before PCORI started, where it wasn't just researchers at a medical school or hospital submitting actual applications to the government for research. These are many applications that are co-chaired or even singly led by organizations like the NF Network, the Children's Tumor Foundation, advocacy organizations that are getting to put their ideas into practice as well. And I think marrying those two aspects of, or even more than two, of researchers, of pharmaceutical companies, patient advocacy organization, lets us get resources from as many different areas as possible and combine them for the most effective research. And just to go back to a little bit that rare disease panel I was talking about, they are committed to rare diseases at PCORI. They've already awarded 37 grants for rare diseases, and while there hasn't been any specific funding for neurofibromatosis yet, it's definitely an opportunity for the NF community to be able to do more research, as there's a new special pools of money that are being set aside just for the study of rare diseases. So this is an exciting opportunity for the NF community to be able to start new research projects. And if you're interested in learning more about PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, I put up their website here, pcori.org/content/get-involved. And this has a way to tell patients and family members and caregivers all of the ways that you can get involved in their work. So regularly they solicit from the community different research questions and have experts look through and sort them and collate them so they can see what people care about. You can actually go and provide comments on the policies and reports that they're making, and you have to apply, but they do accept patients and other representatives on the boards that decide projects are going to get funded, and on their advisory panels. They also have a lot of educational webinars and workshops to help patients and their caregivers and family members become sort of PCORI ambassadors so that everyone can spread the word about patient-centered outcomes research. Okay, so now that we've talked about how nationally patient research is growing, I want to focus in how are we actually implementing it in neurofibromatosis, which is, I think, one of the things that we all care about the most. And so to begin with, I wanted to talk about patient registries. I think many of you might be involved in some of the NF registries that already exist. Patient registries are a jumping off point for patient-centered research. I wouldn't say that the existence of a registry in and of itself necessarily means patient-centered research is happening, but I think very luckily and due to the dedication of the NF advocacy organizations that we're lucky to have, these registries really are helping with patient-centered research. So one thing you might have heard of is the NF registry sponsored by the Children's Tumor Foundation, which currently has almost 6,300 patients already registered. And I think this is great in that by looking at the medical information that people are volunteering to share, we can help understand perhaps what are the patterns in people's symptoms and on a much larger scale, and help us target questions at what makes one person's symptoms different from another. And this is really a good platform for people who are interested in getting involved in research because researchers and doctors can look through the registry to find people who meet the kinds of requirements they need. So for instance, if I'm doing a research project on NF2, I can look through and find the people with NF2 and let them know about important research opportunities that they might want to be involved in. There's also disease-specific registries, by which I mean a registry specifically for patients with NF type 1, and there's another one called the International Schwannomatosis Database, just for patients with schwannomatosis. And these are housed at the Washington University of St. Louis and Johns Hopkins, respectively. And I think that this are also very valuable separate from the overall registry because they can be a little bit more detailed about the specific conditions that people have and the problems you might experience. And I think it'll really help with developing more personalized treatment strategies as we get to see the more specific differences between every patient. And then I also put up this in regarding to funding for research. I'm not sure if you are familiar with something called the Neurofibromatosis Research Program. It's actually a part of the Department of Defense here in the United States through their medical research program. There's a dedicated funding for NF research. And the DoD, for actually a long time to their credit, has recognized that patients and representatives from advocacy organizations should be involved in deciding what projects to fund. And so there are patients and other representatives on the Department of Defense review board that goes over these applications. And one of the things I'm most excited to talk about in terms of where patient-centered research is in NF is a group called RAINS. This is the Response Endpoints in Neurofibromatosis and Schwannomatosis group, of which I'm a member. And it's an international group with people from all over the US and Europe who are dedicated to trying to improve clinical trials and NF. And the way that we're trying to do that is by figuring out what the best outcome measures are to use in clinical trials. And once we figure out what the best ones are, to make those recommendations and agree that everyone in the community will use them. That way we'll be able to not only have the highest quality information studies, but be able to compare better between different studies, so that if you find out that this drug works 10% of the time, but I find out it works 50% of the time, we'll be able to compare and dig deep into the data and figure out what that means and for who this drug should be for a lot better without having to do a new study. And RAINS has been around since 2011, has been growing, and there's more than at least 100 researchers and clinicians involved. And something I'm excited to talk about is that RAINS has really recognized that patient-centered research and patient research partners are really valuable and could help contribute to our effort. So one of the things that we're planning is that at the upcoming NF Forum that's sponsored by the Children's Tumor Foundation in June in Austin, Texas, we want to include members from RAINS to be there at the forum to answer questions you have and tell you about the research that we're doing and get your ideas and input on what are the areas that we should study and what are the different topics we should cover and how could we improve the research experience for you. And hopefully we'll also have opportunities for you to participate in the projects that we've been doing as we sort of test out what are these outcome measures that are the best to use. And as I was talking about patient-reported outcomes, that's one of the committee I actually sit on, in which we're trying to figure out what are the best survey tools and computer tools we can use to get feedback from patients during studies to find out how they're doing. And that leads me into, we want to hear from you. I hope I've really convinced you throughout this presentation that what you have to say is important, and it's just as much value as what researchers and doctors have to say about NF. And if you can contribute, I know I can't hear you all specifically, but I'd love to know what's the most important things you think we should be researching. One way to think about this is when you go to your appointment at the doctor, what's the one thing you wish they could tell you that we don't quite have the answer for, that you really wish we could know, and that will help us prioritize topics. You know, and if you've ever been in a research study, what do you think we could be doing better, and how would you like to be involved? So we'll have a question and answer period where I hope to hear from you, but I've also left up my email at work and also my Twitter handle if you want to reach out for questions or comments on the talk. I'd be happy to take them. And I think now I'll hand it back to Kim to see if you guys have any questions that I can answer for you.
Well, thank you very much, Vanessa. What a great talk. I learned a lot today. So I just want to make it clear to everybody, you know, that there is an opportunity for you to ask your questions. And then one of the things, the feedback that Vanessa is looking for is if you could answer what is the most important thing that we could be researching. So if some of you could just jump down there in that question box and put your response to that question, I will read it out loud so Vanessa will know that information. And while I'm giving them a chance to do that, Vanessa, I actually had a question early on in your presentation, because not only did I think that a lot of this information will help research, but boy, even open up that communication at the doctor's office by that slide that you had showing just more of a patient-centered visit, you know, when you visit your NF doctor. You had talked about some mobile apps, too, that are coming out. Do you have a recommendation or know of one where people could sort of track information that goes on a daily basis, that you might forget, but then this way you would have all that information that you could relay when you went to the doctor's office. Are there some that you know of that you think are doing a really good job?
Yes, so I do know of one that I was recommended to me by another NF researcher. This was specifically on the topic of pain. It's called Catch My Pain, and it's an app to help you remember, especially if you have sort of one-time increases or decreases and it's hard for you to remember what triggered the pain and where it was, an easy way to be able to track it. I don't know of any other specifics for other areas right now, but I am totally an advocate, and I do this myself, of before I go to the doctor, writing down questions in a little notepad on my phone, just a simple notes page that I keep open for questions I want to ask and things that I want to talk about. So I can definitely look into that a little bit more and hopefully give you guys information afterwards.
Yes, that would be great. I've heard that before. Catch My Pain was a good app. So if we could get a little bit more information on how we get that, if it's something we can get from Apple or Google Play, or exactly what would be the best way to use that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's looking like we don't have, we have people that are not typing the questions in yet, Vanessa. So I hope everybody can see Vanessa's email right there so that you could email with any questions that you have on the presentation tonight. And also specifically, she was really looking for information about this is your opportunity to really be able to voice your opinion about what is the most important thing we should be researching or we could be researching. We would really like to be able to give that feedback back to Vanessa. So you could email me here at the NF Network office. You could just send it to admin@nfnetwork.org or send it directly to Vanessa. Either way, I would make sure that she got those questions.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share with everyone to stimulate your thinking maybe. I was lucky enough to talk to you about patient-centered research back this summer at MGH during the Patient and Family Forum that we jointly hold with Boston Children's Hospital. And there were some interesting things that I heard that I definitely think we need to focus on more. And some people had mentioned that they really want to know what's the effect of pregnancy and taking birth control or other hormones on the symptoms of NF? And
yeah,
a great question.
Yes, that really is a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I have come in here now. One of them comes in from Beverly. She says, when participating in a research study, it would be nice to get results afterwards. Can you talk a little bit about how that happens? I know that typically is part of the program.
Absolutely. I do know that there still are a lot of studies that don't feed reports back to patients routinely, which I think is very unfortunate. I think it's something you should definitely discuss with the investigator when you're signing up for the study, to ask up front about that. There are times that we are required to share the information, at least with your primary care physician, when we find things that might be medically relevant, and we definitely do that. But I think that it is a right of patients. You're volunteering that as long as it can be done safely and won't affect the integrity of the study, that we should be sharing this back. I think there's one caveat to that, in that sometimes studies on genetics, where they draw your blood and are trying to look at the testing, we can't report back because we're doing it in our labs, research labs, and they're not accredited to be up to the 100% accuracy standards that clinical labs are. And so there's the slight worry that if we told you something, it might have a mistake in it that we hadn't caught yet. And so there is a reason for some things that they might not be able to tell you, but certainly for things like getting an MRI, being able to have that later and to send that to your primary doctor or something like that is a completely reasonable request.
Yeah, and a benefit too. Here's another one from Aubrey. She's talking about areas for research, and she's talking about NF and hematomas. as one of her areas to focus on.
Yeah. So hamartomas are not my particular area, and I'm going to refresh my memory that it's a, let's see, I think they occur in different locations in NF, or are you talking specifically about the eye?
I'm only familiar, I know that they happen within the brain, and Aubrey isn't saying, so Aubrey, if you're still on the call and would like to add, she's talking about the brain, she just typed it in, the brain.
Oh, okay, brain hamartomas. Yeah, I think this might be related, the thing they call UBOs, unidentified bright objects, which are when we take an MRI of the brain and we see just this sort of white lightness and we have no idea, frankly, what it is. I don't mean that in a scary way. I mean, we do know that it's not a tumor, but we're not exactly sure why it's happening in patients with NF. And that's an excellent question to help, I think, even though it's not a tumor and so maybe we don't focus on it, it's something that, obviously it makes sense you would want to clarify just for peace of mind why it's there. And that's a great suggestion.
And she's typed a little bit more information here. She says that she has one, and she's still clueless as to what it is. She says, no one really knows, and then she says, laugh out loud.
I understand your pain. It is a hard thing not to know exactly what's going on, but at least I can give you the reassuring information of it's not a tumor, it's not cancer. But we definitely should look into that more.
Okay, so now I've got something here from Suzanne. She's talking about her area would be what triggers more tumors and when itching. So she's talking about, the tumors, how they itch.
And yes.
Then, yeah, and then what causes more tumors.
Yeah, I think that the what causes more tumors is such a fundamental question because I think we've all seen that different people, even if they have the exact same mutation, the specific error in the NF gene, they might have a totally different number of tumors. Some might have only a few, some might have 100, and that's something that's very confusing to us, and I know some researchers are studying that, trying to see are there other genes involved that kind of modify what's happening with NF that explain these differences in a way we'll be able to predict for people. And the second point about itching is something that I would have never thought about until I started talking to patients, is you see them and I think more about pain in the classic sense of internal pain, but itching, especially I've heard in times of the summertime or times when you might be sweating more, can be just a real pain. I mean, that's something that is a constant irritant. And unfortunately, I don't think we know that much about it now, but it's definitely a good focus to add to any trials that we do in the future to say, if you're studying especially skin tumors in NF1, put in some extra information about itching and so we can try to understand that. Thank you so much for suggesting that.
Yes, yeah, a lot of people have talked about itching even maybe when the tumor is starting to grow or while it's growing, and they seem to think that the itching stops when the tumors stop growing.
Oh.
So I want to jump back a little bit here to Bev's comment about, getting feedback from the trials, because she added some more information in here. She says, when talking about results, I mean not individual, but was the study in general successful or not, such as the lovastatin study?
Oh, that is a great question. That is a great point, and that's what I think when I was talking about dissemination and how patients can help with that, I think that's something that we definitely don't do enough, and it's something that they're trying to improve nationally. There's a specific site, it's called clinicaltrials.gov, and when you do a clinical trial, you're required to register it there to say exactly what you're doing and what the outcomes were. And they've added a requirement in that now you have to report the results of your study. And unfortunately, a lot of people are still really slow to do that. They're worried, they want to sift through it and publish it first, which is unfortunate in that not everyone is keeping up with it. That's one place you can try to find some information. But I think that one of the most important things we can do is at the same time we're writing a very technical document to publish in a scientific journal, we should be writing a plain language, easy to read summary and sharing that out to patients. And so that's actually a great idea, and I'm going to suggest that at MGH if we can do that. I think we'll have to ask for permission from patients to, keep their either email or address information so that we'll be able to send it back out to them. And I think this is also why the NF Network, I believe, sponsors a publication where, is it called the Network Edge?
That's
where,
right.
Yeah, where they try to summarize all the things that have been published over the past quarter. And so if you're interested in seeing how some of the research is going, I would definitely recommend reading the Network Edge.
Yep, we got another one coming out really soon.
Okay.
Here's a question from Herb. He said, in a disease like NF with a highly variable disease path, how do you evaluate a drug designed to prevent symptoms?
Oh, yes, that's a great study. It's something actually, so the RAINS group I was talking about clinical trials, we just had a meeting on Monday, and this is one of the things that we talked about studying what's called the natural history of a disease. And by natural history, I mean even when you're not treating it, what happens to people, so that you can then compare what's happening in a drug to what you think would have happened otherwise, because that's something you need to know if you're talking about preventing tumors, and a way of, after a year you don't have a new tumor, you need to know the natural history of the disease to say, well, is that normal and maybe they wouldn't have had a tumor anyway, or is it actually an effect and you did a good job with this drug? So I can tell you that there's definitely more effort to look into the natural history so we can make those comparisons. There's been a long-standing study at the National Institute of Health for an NF1 specific natural history study, and I believe they're also doing an NF2 as well that they've been doing for a long time. So we're getting better and better information as time goes on, so that we can then say what happens, if we're trying to prevent tumors. Did we do a good job at it? And I know that there are some upcoming trials being planned that, if the research is panning out the way it looks like it is, that we will be able to put into action some trials specifically focused at preventing tumor, or at least slowing the growth of tumors that already exist, even if we can't get rid of them completely.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be really great, especially before they even started.
Absolutely.
So we have a comment here from Amber. She says, hi, I'm Amber. I'm speaking on behalf of my mother. I was wondering, for the tumors that appear on the body and under the skin with the itching, my mom has it to the extreme, and there are no medications to help ease, not even cream. Is there any medication or major studies dealing with this aspect of the disease?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of any that are currently ongoing. I know that there were at least two that were trying to use topical medication, so creams, to try and help, but unfortunately it doesn't look like either of those drugs ended up working. So it's definitely something that's on people's radar, but unfortunately so far we haven't been successful in trying to find something that would help with the tumor, those skin tumors there. And I think, as the other person mentioned with the itching, it's absolutely a critical thing that I think people might underestimate its importance, which is obviously, as we can see from how your mom is, that it really is critical.
Absolutely. And Amber, I guess the best thing to do is really go back to your NF specialist, and ask them. And if you need some recommendations, you can give us a call here at the office, 630-510-1115, and we'd be glad to make sure that you have the information of some of the the excellent NF clinics we have around the country. Right, and then we have one more here, and then that is, oh, Amber says thank you.
Absolutely.
Suzanne says, are seizures a part of NF?
So yes, seizures are a part of NF1. Not everyone with NF1 would get seizures, but there is a higher rate of people getting seizures who have NF1 compared to people who don't. So that is related, and I know people are, especially some of the pediatric hospitals, are really looking into that because I think you can see it a little more often in kids.
Yes, unfortunately, we sure do. So I think we're going to go ahead and close. That was the last of our questions. Thank you, Vanessa, for your presentation tonight. It was absolutely excellent. And we did record the webinar tonight, so it will be available on the nfnetwork.org website in just a couple of days. After the webinar is over, you're going to see a survey. It's going to pop up. If you could take a few moments and reply, I'd appreciate it. There'll also be one that'll come out in your email, too, if you're unable to do it right after the webinar, because the information that you give us back really helps us to be able to design webinars in the future. And then I would like to say again, thank you very much, Vanessa, for your dedication, your passion for helping the people with NF, and for everybody attending. Thank you to everyone, and have a very nice evening.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone who was able to attend. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad that you're interested.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.